book. It is The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Maté and his son Daniel Maté. I found out about this book through a talk that the two of them were having. I forget the organization that was hosting the talk, but they were talking basically about how to have difficult conversations around the genocide that's happening in Gaza with folks who might be more Zionist leaning, meaning that they don't really feel like they want to make room for Palestinians to have land as well. I think that's, gosh, not to get totally political here suddenly. None of my books are really political, but I should probably read more political books. So that'll be the next video, will be my first venture into politics. But briefly, I will say that my understanding of the problem with Zionism is that it doesn't make room for there to be others, for them to exist. And I think that's also the feedback that I've heard with, for example, Jewish students on certain campuses where Palestinian support in support of Palestinian protests have been happening, where some students have felt like the protests were anti-Semitic because of a certain chant that or slogan that is used a lot of the times in the protests, which is from the river to the sea. So I'm really not qualified to talk on this subject. I'm just saying my understanding of it. Again, feel free to share your perspective in the comments. I'm very interested to hear what other people have to say about it. But anyway, so Dr. Maté was talking about how to have these difficult conversations and where he's coming from as, I believe, an Israeli, certainly a survivor of the Holocaust himself. So he has a lot of really interesting and deep, and I would say like insightful and compassionate things to say. So maybe I'll start a little bit with this book. I haven't gotten super far in this book. It's quite a thick book, as you can see, but chock full of good stuff. Let's see if I've done any underlining. No underlining. I mean, the last chapter that I read was about, he's talking a lot about basically the myth of normal is that there's a lot of things in our culture that are toxic, and that normalize toxicity. And so he kind of talks about like how different communities, a lot of times like indigenous communities, might have had different way of doing things that were more in line with our natural way of being. Maybe like, let's say before industrialization kicked in. I think that's also maybe an interesting conversation to have, is exactly like when did the West ruin how we're naturally meant to be. But he talks about kind of more like intuitive and natural ways of being. For example, he talks about the process of birth, mothers giving birth to babies, and the medicalization of that process that has happened in our country. And that he talks to an OBGYN, for example, who says that she feels like the medical institution is kind of set up in a way that sort of makes women feel like their body is not going to be able to do something that it's supposedly very naturally capable of doing. I know I myself personally have a lot of fear around what the process of pregnancy and certainly giving birth would be like. It seems like it's a very intense, almost like traumatizing situation. But his point is that it doesn't have to be that way, and that in a lot of cultures it's not that way, and that actually if you are more respectful of your body and also like respectful of what the mother wants, like for example, he interviews a woman who was basically forced to have a C-section even though she didn't want to, and the doctor just kept saying, no, you really need it, no, you really need it, and she was like, I really don't want it, I really don't want it. But she felt like she didn't really have a voice or a choice about that. And apparently that happens to many women. So that's the last chapter. Right now I'm opening to a chapter that is called What Choice Do I Have? Oh yes, the chapter that I was just talking about. What choice do I have? Childbirth in a medicalized culture. At the beginning of the 21st century, we have to rehumanize birth, realizing that there are limits to our domination of nature. He's a French obstetrician who said that. So he's got another chapter here. The mind can do some amazing things, from madness to meaning. Perhaps the line between sanity and madness must be drawn relative to the places where we stand. Perhaps it is possible to be at the same time mad when viewed from one perspective, insane when viewed from another. Richard Benthal, Madness Explained, Psychosis and Human Nature. So I would recommend this book. Like I said, I haven't gotten super far in it, but the lengths that I have gotten into it, I found it very validating. But of course, it's also easy to read somebody who you agree with. Like I do happen to agree with this idea of over-medicalization of the birthing process, and that we are pretty out of touch with what women actually want, or what's actually best for us in giving birth. And excuse my use of the word woman. I don't necessarily mean to be exclusionary when I say that. I did also read an article earlier this week that's talking about how medical institutions like the American Medical Association are adopting more gender affirming and gender neutral terms, and the important distinction between gender and sex. And so like medical professionals can be accurate when they're talking about something, and also to make sure that they find out about things that they need to find out about. Like, for example, if something's going to interfere with somebody's birth control, you don't want to assume that somebody's not taking birth control just because of how they present, for example. So what I mean to say is childbearing people or childbirthing people, they go through, and I think it's really important to point that out and to try to change some of these things in our society. So I think that's what he's trying to do with that book, is just point out things that we're made to feel like are normal and that we should be okay with, but that actually aren't good for us, and to kind of maybe actually normalize us not feeling good in the current system that we live in, and that actually we're not crazy, we're just in a crazy system. So I think there's probably a call to action at the end, I hope, but exactly what that action is difficult to say.